So for this afternoon session, we have Chelsea Hall with us, and she'll be talking to us more about inclusion in the military and what that looks like, and a little more information too about her personal experience with the Exceptional Family Member Program. And a little later in her session, she has a couple of parents who are also going to join her and share some of their experience too. So we're really excited to hear more about what inclusion looks like in the military and some of the unique circumstances these families face. So Chelsea, welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Hi, Mary. Thank you so much. I have been looking forward to this for some time. And so I wanted to start off by just acknowledging how wonderful it was to be asked to speak today, to be affiliated with an organization that sees this as an important topic. Embracing and welcoming our military families. So I feel like I am speaking to my people, to my tribesmen, if you will. And so again, thank you for being an organization that values the input of embracing our military families. And then again, to be here as a parent voice is wonderful for me. I'm going to be sharing a lot about who I am today in trying to represent that parent voice. But I've also worked as a professional and wearing many different hats in the field of special education. Our topic for this next hour, inclusion for our military connected children with exceptional needs. And I do want to emphasize again at the top of the hour, I've got three wonderful military spouses, active duty military spouses who have a child enrolled in the Exceptional Family Member Program, what you might hear me refer to as EFMP, that are going to be here to share their stories. So this should be a really fun, action-packed 90 minutes together. So my name is Chelsea Hull, and I am making 10 years as an active duty Navy spouse. I was thinking about that term making, something in Hawaii, right, that we used to say when a child made one or a child made two, right? It was a little bit of a different syntax. And I'm really excited to hit my 10-year anniversary with my active duty sailor this year. I am a mother of two wonderful children, one who is diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and ADHD. I will be calling my children by their names today. Again, I plan to be very transparent and open during our time together here. My son's name is Elijah, and my daughter's name is Emily. So he is almost 8 years old, and she is 6 years old now. I also grew up in what I consider a very diverse family. My mother had a severe hearing loss. She also had a severe heart condition. So that naturally impacted me with a gift, I believe, for inclusion and accepting people with various abilities and disabilities. Inspired my career to become a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing. So I have worked in the field for about 20 plus years now as a teacher or an interpreter. And I will talk a little bit today about some of my work with the Hands and Voices Military Project. That is a nonprofit organization that supports families of children who have hearing loss. And we're so lucky to get to hear from some of those members who will be on our panel today. Big disclaimer, right? I do not represent any branch of the United States military. I am here, like I said, speaking as myself, a parent, a mother. So disclaimer. I have just three main learning objectives for our time here today. The first is I would like to spend a few moments allowing us to really stop and think, reflect on some of our personal thoughts and experiences about the active duty military lifestyle. Help you as friends or professionals in the field to understand the stressors and how those impact the active duty military family, with the goal in mind of feeling more comfortable and confident to support and include military families. So why does inclusion for our military connected families matter? If you look at the Individuals with Disabilities Educational Act, known as IDEA, you will see, the the exact term I took right here, right? The highly mobile lifestyle that's included in the law to protect our children who are highly mobile. And I think it hasn't been until recently that we've really started to look at embracing and including the military families as part of that population that is highly mobile, that is very transient, and can also be considered underserved or underrepresented. And it is because of that unique lifestyle, right? That constant movement, that sometimes we don't get to necessarily be a voice because our lives are so incredibly busy or time sensitive, as I like to say. So that is certainly one of the reasons. It's just the general nature of our lifestyles. Military readiness is a topic, if you're not familiar with it, which relates to our servicemen, men and women being able to perform their job. And so we know when military families are thriving at home, their deployed spouses are able to do their job to the best of their abilities, our national security is at its best. So military readiness is a really important topic. And I think as we gain a little bit more attention from our senators, our congressmen and women on this topic of really making sure that our children with special education are supported and our families, our spouses are supported, that we know that those active duty members can do their job to its best and protect and serve our country at its best too. Took this statistic here from Blue Star Families, who does a huge survey every year. And we're looking at seeing a lot more families residing off of the military bases. So about 2/3 currently residing off base. So we are everywhere. Military families are embedded in your local communities. So again, within about the last 2 years, I would say, we're starting to see a lot more of these types of surveys, asking families who have children with special needs, about the support that they're receiving or the support that they need. And this is a long statistic, but I think it really hits home if we can get through it together. You look at 24% of parents responding in this survey of military connected families. And we see that about 87% of these families, so 24 have a special need, right? An exceptional need. So if we look at that quarter or 25% about of families, and we see that, okay, probably 87, like 90% of them have a child who, requires some special education or a 504 plan. That's like the majority of them, right? Around 70% of those feel that they were having challenges implementing the IEP. So, I mean, that right there to me is just a very startling high number. While 50% of those reported the accommodations and support had not remained in place during a transition. So when we talk about, moving from one state to another state, and, bringing our IEP or bringing our 504 plan and not having those needs or those accommodations in those legally binding documents, not having those met, this is a really huge problems for our special education families. Around 66% reported that they could have benefited from some legal advice during these moves. And I will touch on this topic a little bit more about the legal advice here soon. So military lifestyle is problematic because it can be isolating and unpredictable. I like to think that COVID has developed a little bit of empathy toward the military lifestyle, because we've all been sort of thrown in this situation where we've had to isolate, right? And there's a certain day-to-day unpredictability that we're all dealing with now. Deployment, frequent moves, short and long-term training of our active duty spouses can place a lot of stress on our military families. Our active duty military families are also a diverse population, making up less than 0.5% of the population. So I'm trying to move. Sorry, I was having a little technical. I was trying to move what I've got on my screen here. But as you can see, we've got, a great breadth of diversity within our military community, within the ranks that our servicemen and women are enlisted. And, I believe, again, that diversity is part of our strength. But yeah, I mean, when you look at, we have a population of less than 1%. And within that population, right, you're looking at about a quarter of families that are raising a child with special needs. So when I talk about our military families and all the challenges and extra stresses that we go through, I think it's really important we pause and we realize how resilient our service members are, our families are, and of course our children are, right? That growing up through that having such a great range of diversity amongst us and experiences and moving different places, fighting through extended separations, right, with from our family. This certainly results in resilience of the military children. And to note too, please, if you'll see on here, the average military child is moving between 6 to 8 times. If you look at the beginning of their kindergarten career to their high school career, 6 to 8 different moves. And that's a lot of starting and stopping. And it's also a lot when you stop to realize that the parent is going to be reestablishing the medical and the educational home with each of these moves. So I've talked a lot at the beginning here, and I would love to offer an opportunity for you to chat with me in the chat box. I'd love to see what some of your early thoughts are on military lifestyle. Did you have someone in your family that served? I'd really like to stop here and just kind of let's think about some of the first exposures that we had. Were they positive exposures, positive thoughts? Maybe just even typing in just a couple of words of first impressions that you had when you were young about the military family. And I'm going to see if I can access the chat. So I don't know that I'm able to access the chat, but if anyone wanted to read me from it.
I'll read it. Mary says, I'm an Army brat. I didn't type it, but my parents moved to Alaska when they were pregnant with me, and that's how we came here.
There's this is such a popular spot, I've noticed, to retire here in Alaska. My husband and I are thinking about it too. And Mary, I challenge you. A lot of people will bring up this term, right? The military brat and moving around. And I love this idea of you being a military angel instead of a military brat. Because think about all that sacrifice that you did for us. And every time you moved and started over with friends at a new school, at a new location. So thank you for your service. I always say that our children sacrifice the most.
Yeah, there are a lot of positives that have come from it for sure. But for me, K through 12, and those 13 years, I went to 12 different schools. So there were a lot of moves.
12 different schools.
Without the special needs concerns, personally, but still, those are really tough transitions.
Oh, absolutely. And then they say the high school, right, becomes the harder one. And that's often, a lot of times the spouses will decide to stay put and let the husband finish 1 or 2 tours and come back. Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. I wanted to share, I certainly had some personal thoughts and some personal biases. My mother was always a big supporter of our men who came home from Vietnam. I always remember the way that she would speak about it as such an act of honor, for our men who went over. So although I wasn't raised and really embedded in this military culture, I certainly do remember having, it bestowed upon me that, that it was something to be grateful for. It was something of honor. I love this picture with Forrest Gump. And I'll tell a little story here because, being a military spouse, I think a lot of times people are sort of interested in my opinion to what's going on. And I love that scene, right, where Forrest finally gets up to the microphone and he has an opportunity to say something about his experiences, right? You'll remember. And then what happens? There's a technical problem, which again, I think dealing with COVID-19, we all can kind of relate to now. Technical problems cannot be planned. But this just brings up to mind the fact for me, and my husband and some of those civil liberties that we do miss out on in being active duty. We were not really privy to be talking about our husband's supervisor, the chief commanding officer. And so this is, again, just one of those areas where we sort of fall into different category. Again, in thinking about my husband here and this idea that he doesn't make the orders, that he executes them. The people who know me personally will know I'm happy to tell the story about how I got involved into this mess, becoming a Navy wife, because I had no intention. I actually told my husband when I met him that I did not date military guys because, personal bias. I kind of saw the lifestyle. I worked for many years as an early intervention service provider for families who had children who were deaf and hard of hearing. And I met a lot of military families. And this was when I lived and worked in Hawaii. And so I would, work with the Marines and work with the Air Force. And I would see, how incredibly busy the families were and the husbands were coming and going. And I just thought, with admiration, but that just wasn't a lifestyle that I felt like I could ever handle. So it was, again, when my husband told me, he didn't make the orders, right? He just executed them, that I kind of changed the way I looked at things, And so today too, I think when we talk about embracing our military families, you don't have to agree with my lifestyle to help support me and to help support my son and to help us get the services that we need. We all come from different walks of life. A service member takes an oath to support and defend the Constitution, and in doing so, forgoes the most simplest of liberties. So this moving being the big one, right? So we don't have to enter in the chat unless you feel like you'd like to. but how many of you have moved in your adult life? Have you moved because you had to? And then have you had to move more than 3 times? I'm thinking, Mary, with 12 moves, that you would probably just want to stay put, right? I'm reaching that point where we have probably 2 moves left. And I'm really not interested in moving anymore if I don't have to. So let's stop and take a second and think about the last move that we made and some of those feelings that come to mind. And if you want to throw something in the chat, stress, anxiety. I think a lot of times we have excitement. We're looking forward to a change or starting over in some areas. Are there any other feelings anyone wanted to mention regarding a move?
I just added that it felt chaotic, just lots of different moving parts.
Right. So if you've seen the mom, I think she becomes an octopus, right? And she's juggling and balancing so many different things. And right. And when you have a child with special needs, we want to be prepared at that next location, right? We want to have all of those documents in place. So it's I think often that we will have the electrical copies of all of our child's evaluations and medical needs. And then we'll also have hard copies that stay with us as we move and gallivant around the country. But yeah, I mean, moving is such a stressful time, right? And then you add in that, a lot of times there's a short-term separation with the active duty member going away for some specialty type of training before they get to the new duty station. So I think a lot of times we look at it as, a deployment is a deployment, but there's a lot of other trainings and requirements that require the active duty to be placed outside of the household for certain periods of time. I'm going to do a quick overview today on the branches of our military, a few detailed information, and then I am excited to get into sharing my story with you today. 5 basic branches of the military: Army, Navy, Marine, Air Force, Coast Guard, and it looks like the Space Force is going to be going by Guardians right now. Please put in the chat if you have heard something different. So that would be 6 branches. Different types of services include that active component called active duty, the reserve component, the National Guard. And one brief note about military protocol. All branches of the military have very specific protocols for nearly every situation. So stepping outside of the rules without proper approval risks the family's access to appropriate benefits. And so, for example, with that EFMP program, there are detailers whose responsibility it is to look and make sure that before a family gets assigned a new duty station, that child or that family member with special needs is going to be able to have their medical needs met at the next assignment. So here are some tips on speaking the language or welcoming our military families. And I just thought this was kind of fun to open the door to having a little conversation about this. I like to think of myself as very young, but I have a lot of colleagues that I work with who have children about the same age as my children, who are quite a bit younger, if you catch my drift. And I always like to say that I just love it when people thank me for our service, especially, not just my husband, but they'll thank me and they'll thank my children. They'll thank us as a family unit. And I think I kind of get, Chelsea, that's really kind of old school. A lot of people don't do that. But I'll tell you, for me, it really opens the door for me to say thank you, for acknowledging the sacrifice that my family is going through, I could get a little choked up, because I think it comes from a sincere place. And when we can have a moment to connect with someone and possibly, become friends with someone, or even just have a moment, right, of learning and growing from each other. I think it's a great way to do it. There's lots of other ways too, right? But this idea, of opening the door, thank you for sharing with me, that you grew up in the military. I admire that. I didn't have that experience. My mother felt this way about it, and then especially if we're going to have a working relationship, right? If you're a service provider who's going to be coming into my home or servicing my son at his elementary school, for me to know that you have an appreciation for our military families, or, just even that you're open enough to acknowledging it and having a conversation with me, that means something. So yes, one of my tips is to always please share those military stories. I was going to say, they can go on and on and on with my husband, but it is part of who we are, right? Take advantage of our time together. I always say, don't ask us when we're leaving, ask us how long you have us for. We may be faced with a lot of barriers. So make sure these families know that you're on their side. I love this from a service member and father. Family-centered services for military-connected children means that you're ready to welcome us and helped connect us to the educational and the medical needs of our families. Okay, so just a few more of my kind of fun ideas. And, we don't want to ask for special treatment, right? I have a colleague, Jenny Swan, who is always reminding me, but you know what? I'll tell you, when you have just moved across the country or moved overseas and someone brings a magazine or a brochure for something fun and drops that off at your door, I mean, that can really feel so welcoming. So I just think it's great. I'll just go over these real quick here. Suggest some places to eat, right? So even just in a conversation and meeting your new neighbors, your military neighbors, suggest a place to hike or a local program where these families can get to know other families, or the kids can get to know other kids. Leave that fun magazine or local travel brochure. Care packages, right? This is something that I think is a bit of a tradition within our military communities. And another thing too, here in Alaska, I've noticed there's so many pilots. I have so many neighbors whose husbands are gone a lot flying, and I'll tease them and say, oh, you're practically a military wife, because your husband's always gone. So I'm kind of doing that for her and leaving her meals and that sort of a thing. Another sort of part, I would say, of our culture is the tell, don't ask, right? And so a lot of times you'll have military families that say, we would like to bring you a meal, we'll be doing that within the next week, or my son, I have a 16-year-old son, and he would love to come over and mow your lawn for you, when that the husband is, or the spouse rather, is going to be gone for some time if the family's going through a deployment. Offering to babysit the kids, just watch the kids outside. Sometimes just the smallest act of kindness can have a huge impact for these military families. Invite, and invite again. So I think, just once you get settled into your new location, it can take quite a while to really get back on your feet and get out and attend events. But I don't believe there's any shortage of gratitude for the military family who moves into town, who has a child with a special need, and there is, a program, a get together for, I was thinking about my son and how he loves certain video games, right? He has his special interests. And so just by knowing that there is this group that gets together once a week to play their special games that I know my son would love to be a part of, that's something I want to get involved with. So keep inviting your military families, even though, we may not come out at first, we definitely will. And military families are known for giving back too. So the Exceptional Family Member Program, EFMP, is a mandated program for enrollment through the United States Department of Defense. It works with the civilian and other military agencies to provide comprehensive support to our families who have children with special needs. So currently, what I'm seeing in the surveys is that there's about 130,000 enrolled families currently. And, how accurate that number is, I think it's going to really thin out the next couple of years. I think we're really going to kind of probably see that go up a little bit. We say, it is a required program, but there was no one at any point in time, after my son was diagnosed, that was showing us to do this. I had a special education background, so I knew that we needed to enroll in this program, but there are some various gaps that I'm not going to go into very much today, but there is some lack of standardization within this EFMP program, and it's gaining some attention now, and there's a task force working to help standardize it across all the different branches. And I'm really hopeful that within the next, 5 years or so, we're going to see a lot more equity amongst the different branches. So one of the big surprises for me as a parent that came out when I realized this EFMP program was different across the branches was there was a really huge number of military families that were actively seeking assistance for special education for their children. And there was a lack of representation within the Marine Corps. And when we started looking at, well, why is this? Why are Army families and Navy families, why are these guys always reaching out and they need so much help getting their children the services that they need? Well, we found that the Marines had access to special education attorneys. So a lot of the work that's been done these last couple of years, and I'll be talking about Partners in Promise real soon. They've been spearheading a lot of work to help get military spouses like myself access to special education attorneys. And so we believe that that's a big part of it. I will head back over to this EFMP coalition here. And I just wanted to honor, the work that is being done, that they're seeing a huge increase in enrollment. And I do believe that they're doing the best that they can to help support our families and to standardize the program. So here is this Promise Act that I was just speaking of. They've begun a Navy pilot program in 2 different locations. One is in Norfolk, Virginia, I believe, and then San Diego. So back to that topic about the legal advice. So, they're doing these annual surveys and they're getting, results back from families saying, we really would have benefited if we just had some legal access. And my story will echo that too. So now what they're doing is they're going to be offering tiered layer of support. And if a family, let's say moves from Georgia to San Diego and they're not getting their child's IEP implemented, then they can contact this first level of support. And then if they still, need more assistance, they can be offered, a special education attorney to assist them through the process of, getting what they feel like they need from their school districts. So it's unfortunate, right, that we feel like our, servicemen and women are fighting this battle on their home front too, right? Our men and women are going off and battling out on other fronts. And then so to have your spouse stay behind and endure these kind of very tough legal battles with the school districts is very concerning. So, but Partners in Promise is working really hard. And one of the things here that they're also hoping for with the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, is a 6-month compliant piece. So when a military family, comes here to the state of Alaska and they bring their IEP, we're just asking for that 6 months of continuity of care to provide that one-on-one aid, that, the speech services, whatever those services that child was getting. We know his need probably hasn't changed, right? The weather might have changed, but the child's need, for what is in that IEP, shouldn't be affected for at least that, first 6 months when they get to their new location. So if you guys have any questions on this, maybe we can do that here toward the end before our panel. And then also I can give you the website too for Partners in Promise. They're really spearheading these programs to improve access to legal services for our families. So if you look down in this little corner here, it says which of the following would most significantly help your child. This again is taken from the Partners in Promise, and really having access to those special education advocates. I was just looking at the remote school enrollment and what a concern that alone, right? Take out, my son's diagnoses, just thinking about the difficulty that COVID has brought into our house. And I mean, just look at that being a double, right? Just double the significance of importance for our families. So this is a problem that we know is happening. And again, it's just great to see it getting some attention and hopefully some help. A lot of the information I look through is also from our Blue Star Families, who does also a wonderful annual survey. And if you kind of look under here where it says 2020 top 5 issues, that third column down under your active duty families, the 40% families have a concern for their children's education. So we would just hope that, we would have less important kind of concerns, right? But, for education to be one of our main concerns is a little bit of alarming. Okay, so now I'm getting into here a little bit more of what I think is the fun part, which is my story. I think I shared with you at the beginning, I did not see marrying into the military as part of my future. I simply fell in love with someone who was active duty. And I mentioned earlier that my mother was deaf. She self-identified as hard of hearing. So I was really fortunate as a little girl. I had this gift of being surrounded by people who were different. My mother, I love this picture here of my mom because she is so young and radiant, but she has her hearing dog. And back in the 80s, if you were lucky enough to get into a program where you were able to rescue a dog, you got to be a part of this program, one of the first of its kind, They were called signal dogs because we gave it a signal. And people always joke with me about the dog knowing sign language, right? And I would say the dog didn't know sign language, but it saw sign language and it understood sign language, but it didn't do any sign language. So sorry if that was a kind of a bad joke. But yeah, I mean, I remember growing up seeing people of so many different abilities around me. And, you know, we had this good friend of ours who was deaf and blind. And so I even had an opportunity as a young girl to get to use some tactile sign language with my friend Susan, who was also my babysitter. But for me, I think it was in how my mom really taught me to include others, and this idea that it's okay to ask people about their differences, to ask them about their hearing aids, or ask them, you know, about how to communicate. And I just think it left such an impression for me that, you know, people had differences, that's everywhere, and it's absolutely okay. So what I've decided to do, let's see how we're doing on time. I thought I would read, it's just about a 5-minute story about my son and what we went through. It was a year my husband was on travel and making his way to Alaska. And I thought I would just read this to you and share a little bit. And then pretty much right after this, we can go into some questions and start our parent panel. I'll also let you look at some what I think are adorable pictures of him from his kindergarten year here. So I've already shared with you that together my husband and I have 2 children, Elijah and Emily. Our son is diagnosed with autism disorder, ASD, and ADHD. He also has hyperlexia, which is a subskill of autism. And if you're not familiar with hyperlexia, it is sometimes referred to as the opposite of dyslexia. So my son is like hyperlexic. So he is so drawn to the written word. He would be staring at the numbers on a camera, right? Instead of smiling to have his picture taken. So he's hyperfixates on written words. He began reading before he was even 3 years old. So it's not uncommon, it's about 10 to 15% of children with autism that have hyperlexia. So like most parents, my husband and I assumed our son would be a genius, right? You know, we doted over all of his first words. Because I knew sign language and taught him sign language, we just assumed he would be bright and speaking well and speaking early on. As Elijah grew, he showed no regression in language. Instead, he was very advanced. All of his medical checkups were normal. We got stationed at the Naval Postgraduate School in Central California, which was where my husband and I met. Life was absolutely grand. It was during the summer of 2018 where my husband left California to attend service school on the East Coast before reporting to our new duty station in Alaska. I stayed behind with the children, as I wanted to offer my son a consistent year of kindergarten. It would be a challenging effort, but hey, we're Navy strong, right? There's nothing we can't handle. We rented a small cottage in what I considered one of the best schools in the area. And so you'll see my note here about the best school being one that welcomes newcomers. Shortly after kindergarten began, Elijah came home with write-ups. I asked to observe him in the classroom, and I was denied. The school staff insisted that Elijah was angry because his father was away on work travel. When the write-ups progressed to referrals, I requested a formal meeting where I was told again that my son was simply acting out. My concerns, which I shared verbally and in writing, included many signs and symptoms of autism. I was no longer in a sort of a denial about my son at this point. So I would write, I see a lack of eye contact. I noted his hyperlexia, his preference for toe walking, and a preference for solitude when he got home from school. These things seem to demonstrate a sense of a disability. I disagreed with the school staff and I requested that my disagreeing be documented, and I requested an initial assessment for special education under child fine law. So here in this picture, this is the day my son received his ADHD diagnosis. There's this beautiful rainbow on the pier here, and he's got his Minecraft book. Again, being a kindergartner, he's reading these full-blown chapter books here. But this was the day, and I also received a working diagnosis of autism for him this day. And around the same time, I was getting certified as an advocate support trainer through the ASRA program with Hands and Voices. So I was actually someone who would go and attend other people's IEP meetings and advocate for them. So I came back, right? So I came back with this diagnosis for my son on this beautiful Monterey day here in California. And I received nothing from the school. Even having just been certified, right, in this program, I was aware of my rights. I was aware of the law, of a lot of special education law. And I was still, I got no response from my school district to help me with my son. I received no prior written notice, no formal evaluation, no compliance with special education to even offer my son an initial assessment. When the referrals kept coming for his behavior, and I discovered the yard duty had once told my son, this will stay on your permanent record, my kindergartner at recess, I insisted another meeting with school officials. Again, I was told my son was acting out because he was angry due to our military lifestyle. I finally turned to our school base's liaison officer, and I'm going to provide her contact information for the one here at JBear. It was the school liaison officer who told me, you know, hey, honey, your son is looking like he has autism. You really need to talk to your pediatrician. This was the first time that someone expressed concern for my son and a sense of urgency that I needed to, you know, get him diagnosed. I had followed through at that point, started following through on every recommendation made. I put my son in occupational therapy. We found a social group for speech language work. However, you know, there was this dichotomy, right, between the medical community telling me your son does have ADHD. It looks like he has autism. You know, you've got to get an IEP in place. You're going to be moving soon. So it's even more important that you do that. And when I would go back to the school, there was just absolutely no support for me. I remember when I presented them and they said, oh, when are you moving? And it didn't feel like they were asking in a concerned way at all. There was one point in the process where I said, you know, you guys have really got to do something. You know, I started collecting everything. I planned to go ahead and file a state complaint against the school district. And they promised me that they would do an occupational therapy evaluation. And with good faith, for 2 months, I waited to have the results of this occupational therapy evaluation for my son. And it was bringing us right to the end of the school year. I remember going, okay, well, they're going to get this done. I believe it. I trust them. They're educators. They must want what's best for my child. And they did not do the evaluation. They came out and they assessed him during snack time, observed him for 15 minutes, did no written assessment, no checklist, no nothing on my son. I was actually told that I was just being sensitive because I was a special educator, that I was seeing something there that wasn't. And time was up, it was time to move at that point. So this is, the classic case of being waited out as a military family. And I'm sorry, I get a little choked up because, I think when it happens to you and it happens to your family, it just becomes so real on a whole nother level. So yeah, my son was denied initial assessments for special education services. And I took it a step further because they did provide at least, a 15-minute assessment, right? And, I said that wasn't an appropriate account of my son's abilities. And I requested what's called IEEs, Independent Educational Evaluations, for which they, of course, denied. And they knew at that point I was moving within a month or two. But you see all of these unfortunate, situations, no prior written notice, no support of child fine law. This is just something that as a military family, it takes my breath away, right? Because I feel like my life is in such a hurry constantly, right? We just don't have a lot of time. That's true sense of urgency. And to be denied our basic rights is really painful. So I did want to just say, hey, even someone like me who kind of boasts a big 20-year, 20-year experience in special education, I'll tell you what, I still don't know what I don't know as a mom. And so I still need the tough conversations opened for me by professionals, right? And other loving parents. I like this. I put this up here because I thought, you don't know about those icicles that are hanging, right? And right now outside our windows, the snow is melting and the icicles are falling, but they are sharp and we should not be standing underneath them, right? And me, having grown up in Southern California, had no idea. So, help us, right? We need friends and we need mentors who have walked in our shoes. And we also want to connect, I believe, too, with other military connected parents for guidance and support. I love this here, right? Because I think no one really truly wants to be an IEP warrior. We want to be an IEP partner or a collaborator. So maybe the armor was a bit much, but John knew there was going to be an epic battle at that IEP today. I mean, we just know, right? We go in knowing that there's going to be a fight for the services that we want. And it's so unfortunate. So there's that cute kindergarten picture I promised you of my little Elijah here. And I emphasize that I filed a state complaint and I won a state complaint on 3 different counts because I think it's important that we hold these schools accountable. We don't always have the energy or the time as we're moving from location to location. But for me, being able to do that before we left meant that that was not going to happen to another military family in that school or in that school district. How important is that? I love this thought right here, right? I certainly am not here today to be a victim. I think our other military moms you're going to meet here on our panel certainly don't want a victim either to be a victim. We just want a level playing field when we move in. Those school liaison officers that I talked about are excellent points of contact. I know that Stone Soup Group has been working closely with the two, I believe, school liaison officers that are here in Alaska at JBear. They do a lot of wonderful work. So I've got their contact information on here. Adele Daniels and Holly Warners. And I'm almost done with my section of the presentation. Katrina Osborne is our EFMP coordinator here in Alaska. So I've got her as a local resource here for you if you're interested. Boy, that's about time. And yeah, our Hands and Voices military project is specifically, Hands and Voices is for families of children who are deaf and hard of hearing. And what I've had the honor to do is work on a board to help bring an opportunity for families to connect with each other. So we've got a Facebook support page. Families from all over the world can connect and ask about their next duty station, ask about the quality of the teachers of the deaf. I always like to joke about that because I'm a teacher of the deaf. Or their audiology services, speech and language services. So, and just kind of how can we kind of as a community, right, maybe here in Alaska, try to really connect our EFMP families with some more of our local families. I just challenge you to try to, keep thinking of ways to offer those direct supports that military families are looking for, and then for those community supports too.
Chelsea, there was one question. Anna wanted to know if you're currently doing advocacy work with parents.
Thank you. I am running my own business. Since there's not a Hands and Voices chapter here in Alaska, I'm not able to volunteer as part of an ASTRA program, but I do run my own business. And so I have just a few clients right now that I do advocacy and consultative support work with. Yeah.
And Chelsea, I was just curious if you could explain a little more about when you said that when you filed a complaint against the school district in California, and you said that you won on those 3 counts. So what do you mean by you won? What was the outcome? What was the change?
I appreciate that because it was very validating for me when those results arrived. The school district, like I think I had, said they refused to grant my son a special education evaluation. So under child fine law, that's not an option. When a family shows, the child has ADHD, the child has a working diagnosis of autism, or my son has, he's doing these 5, 6 things that we know are symptoms of autism. So having a suspected disability, it is the school district's responsibility to offer an initial assessment for special education. And they completely denied my son's rights of that. And when a family family has an opportunity too, if they do provide some level of evaluations and the parent disagrees with those, the parent has a right to say, I would like a second opinion. Those are those IEEs, the independent educational evaluations. And that is also not a choice for the school district. The school district has an obligation at that point to go and seek or work with the parent to get these independent evaluations. So when I asked for that and was denied, and when a parent is denied a request, the school district also has an obligation to provide a prior written notice, a PWN. And, it's funny because I was thinking a little bit about this, and and sharing kind of what was really going through my mind, because I mean, I felt discriminated against. But then there was this piece of me that went, is it truly possible that our special education director doesn't know what a prior written notice is? And when you start sifting through, some of those resources I showed you, Blue Star Families and Partners in Promise, you'll see that, like 50% sometimes of families will report they're not receiving prior written notices either. So I don't mean to open a huge can of worms, but I mean, it's truly possible that these special education support directors, don't know, they're not giving us our rights because they really just aren't educated on their jobs. So they were the district was found out of compliance in those areas. When I say I won those cases, they were clearly found, I felt like, out of compliance, and they were required to provide special education training to the entire school district. So they had to get educated on what a prior written notice was. They had to hire someone to come in to train them specifically on child fine law to make sure that other little boys like my son, aren't going to be denied their initial rights to special education evaluations. But yeah, and there's two different ways that you can pursue things. But I know that I have an expert on my panel who can talk more about this too. So I hope I answered that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. I am so excited. We can just move into our panel here. I don't know. I was thinking we could go in alphabetical order by first name. I'll let you three work this out. But so welcome. Can you I'll take a turn, please. Tell me your name, branch affiliation, if you don't mind, how long you've been an active duty spouse, and tell us something fun about yourself.
Okay, I guess I go first. My name is Adriana Lopez. My husband is in the Navy. We're currently stationed in San Diego, California. We've been married going on 8 years, and he's also been active for going on 8 years. He's actually currently deployed right now. So we are in that time of our lives. Interesting facts about myself. I couldn't decide between two of them. One's more interesting than another. I guess interesting fact is I am also a parent or a child of deaf parents, and I also have a deaf son. So I'm in the middle. And the other interesting fact about myself is that even before COVID, I have never had a sense of smell. So it's been interesting when people say, do you have a sense of, loss of smell, loss of taste? I'm like, I've never been able to smell. So that's been pretty funny to see people's reactions when I say I can't smell during this last year. So yeah.
My name is Amanda McGowan. My husband is active duty in the Coast Guard, and we've been married for almost 9 years. And I couldn't think of a really good fun fact, but one thing is I drink tea, not coffee.
Okay, I guess that leaves it to me. My name is Kristen Stratton, and my husband is in the Marine Corps, and he and I have been married going on 13 years. He's been in the Marine Corps for 14 of those 13 years that we've been married. And together we have 3 children, all of whom are enrolled in EFMP. So that's been, an adventure. I actually am an EFMP myself because I'm a hard of hearing adult. And right now he is actually stationed on unaccompanied orders, which is something that is unique to our EFMP families who are not cleared to travel with the service member. We are sometimes forced to live separately from each other, and that's our situation right now. That separation can be for a period of 1 to 2 years on unaccompanied orders. In our case, it's 1 year. So, for our Army families, that's their average deployment. So it's not anything that's unique in the military to be separated for times, over a year sometimes, but that's what we're currently going through. And I don't know what's interesting about me. Interesting is kind of relative, Chelsea. But I would call myself just a perpetual student. I love learning. And so being an advocate has been a natural pairing to my always motivated to learn. So I'm actually getting my doctorate because, having 3 kids and being a military spouse just wasn't enough work apparently. So there you go.
See, I love it. I'm in good company here, ladies. Thank you. Let's talk. I would love to hear a little bit about your journeys in becoming an exception in the Exceptional Family Member Program. Would you like to share with us about your 1, 2, or 3 kiddos and kind of how, was enrolling in that program? I don't know. Can you kind of talk about it from, not just that like, oh, the paperwork, right? Because I remember that part of the program, and it was sort of like, okay, now I am in the program, and now it was like for me too with my son's autism. Okay, I was really starting to process and become this parent, of a child who obviously had needs that were under my radar. But a little bit about, your journey, just as, an EFMP family. Adriana, take us away.
Yeah, so out of my 2 children, my oldest, who is now 5 years old, is on EFM. Initially, he was born premature and he had gastroschisis. So what that means is his intestines were on the outside of his body when he was born. And we spent about his first 5 months in the hospital. So he needed that extra care for specialists and all of that. And so we started our EFM journey while he was in the hospital. So that paperwork and, navigating that whole part of EFM is kind of a blur just because we had so many other things going on and to be concerned about at that time. And then when he was discharged from the NICU, we actually found out that he also had a hearing loss. He was deaf. And so then we kind of were in not unfamiliar, but it wasn't home to us. It wasn't where we grew up. And so knowing where to find the resources that we needed, besides like the specialists, but to find the community that we needed for a child with hearing loss was kind of difficult to navigate. And so we had our liaison with EFM and to reach out to, and even though it was kind of relatively new, it's not a big community, really well known. So we had to work together to find the resources in where we were stationed at that time in Virginia, and to navigate that, and then also getting all the resources and services that EFM has. And because we had so many specialists, the case manager who will call you and say, hey, don't forget you have an appointment tomorrow because you have so many different things going on. So that was helpful and nice to have someone or a point of contact to go to when you needed EFM and all the resources that it can provide for you.
Okay, so first a little side note. The Coast Guard does things slightly differently because we fall under the Department of Homeland Security instead of DoD. So The Coast Guard calls it the Special Needs Program, but we use the EFMP forms. So, it's the same, but not the same. Just a fun little wrench in there. So the process of enrollment was fairly smooth and fast. Also, like Adriana said, a blur. I had twins and they were diagnosed as hard of hearing. And I also had a not yet 2-year-old. So it was not, I don't remember it that much, a lack of sleep. But we were actually stationed in Ketchikan at the time, and we did not have services for my kids there, audiology, ENT, none of that. So we had to fly to Seattle every 3 months to obtain services. And so we were like very highly motivated to get the paperwork done because we were coming up on a transfer and we didn't want to end up in another place where we had to travel like that. So we wanted to make sure we got that done. The Coast Guard, so again, it's slightly different, not as many resources as the bigger branches, but in certain locations, we use the bigger branches, liaisons and things like that. But overall, we've had a really good experience with our, we call them FRSs. They help us figure out where we can and cannot be stationed depending on what the needs are. And that's really, it's been very smooth for us overall. So.
It's so interesting how even though we're all performing similar jobs for our country, how different the branches can be. And sometimes it feels like they're different just to be different and not necessarily for the purpose of improving efficiency. But, that's just something that we as military spouses across branches can kind of joke about because we just, our acronyms are different, but our mission and our stresses are very much the same. So as I mentioned before, all 3 of my children are enrolled in EFMP, and then I, as the adult dependent, am also in EFMP. A dependent just refers to anyone who lives with the active duty service member and who is eligible to receive benefits that are earned by the service member. So and I'm sorry if that's information everybody already knew. Our situation, kind of like Adriana, was a blur because at the time of enrollment for our youngest, we were also simultaneously enrolling the older 2. But essentially at the time of enrollment, we were in the middle of a reenlistment of PCS, which is a permanent change of station. So moving from one base to another. Our son was identified as being deaf. And then our son, who also has a birth injury, was undergoing lots of other tests, including genetics and whatnot. And we were misinformed that he was actually had a fatal disease, and he did not. So at the time we were going through all these major life changes, we also were grieving the potential loss of our son within a few years' time. Thankfully, they were wrong. But, I think that's just something that's significant to military families because everyone experiences major life stressors. Like, for example, with this year with COVID, that was kind of a rote thing that people were saying was that, we're all in this together. But really, sometimes we're all in this together, but then you add deployment on top of that. You add families who have EFMP children or adult family members who are very much at death's door, who are dealing with very significant health challenges. And then the service member has to take all that, swallow it, and go perform whatever tasks that they're assigned to do. And then whoever is, the spouse or whoever is the family member that's home with those children, kind of same thing, swallow it and just push through. And I think one of the things that we really appreciate as a EFMP family, and then also just, being a military family in general, is how much compartmentalizing that requires of the family, but that our kids, as resilient as they are never fully insulated from those stressors. And so really prioritizing both their access to their educational supports, but also mental health supports and social emotional supports, because every time we have to change where we live, or we have to change providers, that just adds to the inconsistencies that they already experience as military children. So I think that we just have to be really cognizant of that those abrupt changes and those transitions are exceptionally difficult on a child with a disability, on top of, everything they're already dealing with.
I would like to volunteer Kristen as a great speaker on this topic. I'm fascinated, by what you were saying at the end there, because if you listen to my story, right, it was like my son was angry that daddy was gone. And it's like, by no means, absolutely, yes, like this is tough, right? We know that trauma, we can't prevent our children from absorbing all the trauma that's going on around them, right? That's impossible. But what we can do is try to educate our schools, right? That signs and symptoms of autism are this, right? Or a hearing loss are this, right? And this is what trauma looks like. So I think this is an area where there is going to be emerging research, really finite, eyes looking at this. Ladies, I already feel like my next question was going to be about barriers, and I heard a couple barriers, but, I want to stay positive. I feel like, can any of you share some, what were some of the positive? I heard a little bit about the EFMP program, like someone being there because I was so busy and overwhelmed, and having that EFMP coordinator really helped me, stay day to day, get the things done. Is there anything else I'm wondering that stands out, maybe that someone did, or a program that was there that you are really grateful for?
Yeah, I'll share. So a big component of the EFMP program. So it's interesting because if you as a service member have a child with a disability or some sort of designation that requires exceptional care, you are required to enroll that family member. But it's also a confidential program. So for example, supposed to be privy to the specific diagnosis, or the ins and outs of that child or adult family member's care, because there's HIPAA laws and things like that. And also there's always the risk that that information can be have a negative impact on that service member's career, especially our service members who plan to retire from their branch of service. We had an instance where a very ambitious commanding officer decided to require all of the Marines to make a PowerPoint presentation designating every EFMP family member in their family, their reason for enrollment, what services they required, and what their level of support was. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And I about lost my mind, because as a professional advocate, I knew that there's a lot of laws that are very that are federal laws, that the military doesn't just to come in and just, as me as an adult or me and my children, we didn't sign that contract where we waived all right to confidentiality. That was my husband who signed that contract. So we had still have a wonderful EFMP case carrier. And there is kind of like an invisible wall between the EFMP and what they call the green side, at least they call that in the Marine Corps, which is like the service side. They don't really talk to each other because they're usually civilians in the EFMP, and then the military, they do their own thing. But in this circumstance, my caseworker alerted her boss, who then alerted our command, and not just our command, but the commanding general for that entire division, to be like, hey, we need to remind you that this is a confidential program. And the only time that that EFMP file is reviewed is when that service member is being looked at for orders. And the EFMP at our headquarters looks at that file and says, yeah, these orders are compatible, or no, they're not. So I will say that we've had tremendous support and advocacy on the civilian side, on the caseworker side. And I think that having that support of just someone who gets the military, who speaks military, but also speaks special needs, because those are two different books of acronyms, that was invaluable. And so that I still have such a wonderful relationship with our EFMP caseworker. And I'm just so grateful that in all the chaos of being a military family, that there's someone who can offer some calm and some insight and be an advocate.
That's awesome that you had that, Kristen. Sorry, the children's movie is over. The couple things that were positive and also helpful with EFM for us is one of them was being the respite care that the Navy provides. And I believe some of the other branches also provide. In the Navy, we get 40 hours of respite care. And so that's been very helpful to have, you know, a double screened one, you know, through the military, and then screened through Child Care Aware. I don't know if Child Care Aware is for all of the states, but at least here in California and Virginia, it was to give 40 hours of childcare for the EFM child, and to help. So when I need to take her, or, you know, I need a break because, you know, it can get overwhelming and stressful, you know, with spouses being deployed and medical appointments and, you know, all this thing, you know, to, you know, sometimes we're away from our families and from somebody that we can trust, and, you know, to being able to have that, you know, respite care, to have somebody that's been screened and trusted to come into our home and help care for our special needs children. And they have individuals who have like a plethora of experience of all kinds of disabilities and all kinds of needs. So that's one really nice thing that the military or AUFM provides for our families.
One thing that I was going to say was we moved last year, we PCS last year in the middle of COVID, which obviously was difficult, but one thing that came from it that I really hope a lot of districts can continue with is that my 3 kids, all 3 are enrolled in the special needs program now, that their IEPs were done virtually, which actually made it easier in a lot of ways, in terms of scheduling and for us having childcare and everything in a new location. That did help. And I think I hope that maybe it's an option going forward for families to choose from. Virtual services were difficult for my kids when that was in place, but having the option for meetings via Zoom was really great. So that's one thing that I took as a positive from from all the COVID crazy.
And Chelsea, I also just remembered that when we were having our transition meeting from our IFSP to IEP for my son, my EFMP caseworker actually came to that meeting. And so that's something that you can do. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be, you know, the most knowledgeable on your child specific qualifying disability. But when that was a brand new process to us, having someone there who had been through it before was so invaluable. So I think that our EFMP family members might consider asking their caseworker that, especially if there's an absence of and local advocacy network or support group in the area. And like Amanda was saying, now that virtual is an option, I do think that school districts going forward will continue to make that available. I think it works for everybody. So I just want to throw that out there too, that sometimes that EFMP caseworker is available. They're a valuable resource as well for IEP or 504 meeting support.
From what I've read within this EFMP coalition and their task force to improve the system, it looks like they're really starting to hire in a lot of more staff and encouraging our EFMP coordinators as well as the SLOs, those school liaison officers, to, I think, really assume that advocate role and come into our meetings. I mean, for me, I'm telling you, I try to joke about it, right? But I had all these friends, right? Because I'd been a teacher of the deaf for so long, who were speech therapists and OTs. I had said, why did you tell me? You know, you could see my son has all these like autistic traits, right? But it was the school liaison officer who said, look, woman, you need to go and tell your this is the protocol. I was like, well, okay, right? Just because I work with special ed doesn't mean I know, the ins and outs of being a mom of an autistic kid, right? So no, I think it's wonderful that, again, I would look at, if you're interested in learning some more, right? I think that National Defense Authorization Act, I think we're really getting, being able to say for 6 months, right? When I get to a new school, these services need to be provided for my son or my daughter. I think that's really important. And I think we're going to see a lot more awareness in our communities. So thank you. I feel charged after talking with you, my other military mamas. I appreciate the positive. And is there any other, kind of like final thoughts on this topic? Any I don't know. I was looking, I'll share real quick. I was looking at the Partners in Promise, PIP, and the work that they do. And they said their big thing today was we love data. Data is great, but our stories complete us. So I love that. I love that, ability to connect and really hear each other's stories. Any final thoughts?
It's always nice to hear and connect with other military families, especially those, those of us that have EFM children, sometimes we feel so alone and so far. We leave, our families, our home, and constantly, because we have new homes everywhere we're stationed, you get time to settle in, you finally settle in, and then you pick up and you move. And so it gets frustrating. And then that transferring and the unknown of I fought so hard to get these services. I researched so much. I spent so many hours finding a community and the resources that my child needs. And then now I have to go and start it all over again in this new place. And will it be the same? Will it be better? Will it even be enough? So knowing that there's other people navigating that process and that the military and the EFM program is working hard to help make our transition easier is always, reassuring, that, even though sometimes it's we feel overlooked as spouses, because we're not the ones that signed our lives away. And sometimes we become, oh, well, you signed up for this. Well, that doesn't make it any easier on us. And so it's nice to know that there are people out there and that we are all in it together, even though it doesn't always seem that way, that we're all here.
I love it. I feel like we could keep talking for another half an hour, and hopefully our attendees will have benefited, right? I mean, it's, I think, wonderful to have a candid conversation with you ladies. I really appreciate your time too. I know this was a little last minute coming together to create this panel today. So thank you very much for your time. And I wanted to give a big shout out too to Stone Soup Group, because when I got here, I was just really fresh wearing my son's diagnosis. And I knew I needed that parent to parent support. And this is the organization. They were on the phone with me. They hooked me up with a neighbor who lives right in I want to say my backyard, right across from here. I could throw stones at her house, who's raised 2 children with wonderful special needs. And so thank you again, Stone Soup, for all that you do and for having us here today.
Thank you, Chelsea. And to Adriana and Amanda and Kristen, thank you all so much for joining us from the lower 48. It was really great to hear your stories. And at Stone Soup, like all of the work that we do originally was founded on peer support, right? It was a group of moms who came together to help one another. And so these stories really are motivating and just core to all of the work that we do. So I really appreciate you sharing your unique perspective from being a military spouse, but I think we probably have a lot more in common than not.